Future Sense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nick Jeans and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, Future Sense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is Future Sense.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for coming down to do this, or up really from
Up
where
really,
you are.
yeah, from down Byron Way, yeah.
Yeah, good place down there, man. It is such a nice place to live.
It's lovely. I've been there, I think, about 9 years now. Yeah, and I love it. It's great.
It's so good. There's something really cool about the landscape of the Gold Coast, how you've got so much different range of, well, I mean, as far as if you're down from Burleigh downwards,
Yeah.
I don't go any further than Broad Beach North because
Yeah.
it's just, I don't know what Surfers Paradise is, but it's bullshit. And then, but coming down this way, I mean, you have these beautiful beaches, and then you go inside to the hinterland, you've got farmland, you've got hills, you've got mountains,
Yeah.
and you've got the rainforest down where you go.
You know it's an old, massive volcano, don't you?
Really?
Yeah. If you look at the satellite photo
my
on
God.
Google Maps, you'll see the border ranges are like the northern edge of the caldera, and it hooks around the back of sort of the Byron, Yukai, Mount Warning area, Wollongong area.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
I think that's part of the reason why the energy is so interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think about that when you say energy is interesting here? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's known that this area was an important healing place for the Indigenous people, and that trend seems to be continuing to the present day. I mean, so many people come to Byron Bay for healing, personal healing, and there's an oversupply of healers there, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there seems to be something to it. I've heard talk, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard talk that there's a lot of black obsidian crystal underneath the ground due to the volcanic history of the area.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's true or not.
What is black obsidian supposed to do?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I'm not a crystal expert.
That's good.
But, you know, crystals have a frequency. I mean, that's, you know, we use crystals in our radios to pick up radio broadcasts and those sorts of things. So they play some sort of communication role, and they have an impact on us in various ways, yeah.
Because essentially we are a being that's created out of frequency, more or less.
I think it's useful to look at it that way, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because I was watching your lecture. I watched the lecture that you gave about these kind of different phases of consciousness, more or less. And it's a scary thing to start talking about because you can end up in this like sort of woo-woo world where it's like, oh, consciousness, they're just raising the,
I know.
you know, lay a crystal on your chest and save the world or whatever. And maybe you are. And that's the funny thing about it is I don't fucking know, as if you would know. And I heard you say something great on a podcast just before you were talking on this martial arts podcast that you do.
Yeah.
And you said that science, as soon as we stop being able to question science, it becomes dogma.
Yeah.
And would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. It seems to be a common thing these days that people latch on to some scientific finding and then they really, it becomes dogma for them, you know, it becomes the law and it can't be questioned. But science itself is the practice of inquiry. I mean, you know, at its purest level, science is about coming up with an idea about something and then experimenting and testing the idea to see what results you get, you know, and then whatever results you get ought to be repeatable if you go through the same process again, you know, and that's really the essence of traditional science. It's about being open and discovering knowledge. And science came historically after the sort of agricultural era of humanity, where we were mainly looking to some higher authority to find out what was true and find out the nature of the world. And usually that was some kind of religious God, right?
Yeah.
And then with the scientific and industrial revolutions, we went through this big shift where we started to realize that actually, no, we can find information out for ourselves if we go through this process of inquiry and testing and experimenting, you know. These days, some science is becoming dogma, as you say, and I think one of the biggest examples of that is the whole climate change issue, where people say, no, the science is in, this can't be questioned, this is the way it is, and effectively that's not science.
Yeah, man, because it has to be questioned. That's the whole point of science. Science is an inquiry.
Yeah,
inquiry proof. That's all it is,
it's
right?
never finished.
Yeah, wow. I mean, what kind of dangers do you see of us not being able to question science?
Well, I think one of the biggest dangers that I see at the moment on a global scale is the climate change debate, where so many people are convinced that they know how our climate works, but actually we don't have a computer powerful enough to simulate or model the climate accurately, and that's obvious because we can't predict, short-term weather changes, and our long-term predictions that we've been making over the last few decades about climate are generally wrong, right? No one's been accurate with their predictions. And if we start to build plans to do things on false assumptions, then we're setting ourselves up for a massive fall.
Oh, fuck, yeah.
Right? I just read an article in the last couple of days in the media about some university in the US that's going to do this experiment where they're going to put a massive balloon up and block out the sun. And they're doing it as an experiment to see whether that could be done large scale to cool the planet because of this global warming idea, right? And I mean, what if we're wrong about that? What if we actually introduce technology that starts to cool the planet down and we find out that all our assumptions about the long-term global warming trend are wrong, and we're actually accelerating, the cooling trend into a mini ice age? I mean, those sorts of things will be, I think, massively disruptive because this is something that's already got some momentum. So it's an area that we need to watch very carefully.
What do you think is actually happening?
I think that we're in a long-term cooling trend. I've spent a lot of my life, particularly my adult life, studying the dynamics of complex adaptive systems and how they change, and particularly applying that to human consciousness. But of course, you can apply it to any complex adaptive system, and our climate is a complex adaptive system. And when these systems go through change, they don't take a linear trajectory, okay? But what we're doing at the moment is generally the thinking around climate change is that it's getting warmer and it's going to keep getting warmer in a linear way. But complex systems don't change that way. When complex systems start to change, they spike in different directions. So you'll get increases in heat, but also increases in cold. And that's pretty much what we're seeing at the moment. If you really look at what is being reported, like just in the last few days, there's been record cold in Asia and also in North America as the winter comes on. So I think there's no doubt that the climate is changing. The climate never stops changing. It's always changing. Right? And we can look back and see these huge cycles of warming and cooling that have been going on for a long time. But to think that there's going to be a linear trend of warming until we all fry like eggs in a fry pan is just ignoring the actual evidence. The evidence is not pointing to that. And it's a very complex topic, but it's also a product of the modern era where our scientific bent that we've been on for the last 300 years has caused people to look very deeply into very narrow topics. And this is played out in society through, like in the medical profession, you can see you've got specialist doctors now that actually know next to nothing about certain parts of the body, but they'll have massively deep specialist knowledge about one particular system in the body, right?
Yeah.
And this applies across the board and even to our climate scientists. So our climate scientists have looked very specifically at what they think is connected to climate dynamics. But there are things outside of the climate science field which are really, really important, which are just not looked at. Like, for example, space weather and solar activity. It's not normally something that a climate scientist would look at. But in fact, it's probably the major driver of our climate dynamics.
That's what our climate is in.
Yeah.
We're in a universe.
Totally. And so the reason that I'm thinking that there's a long-term cooling trend happening at the moment is I'm looking at evidence from a number of different sources, and most of them are outside the climate science field, like astrophysicists, for example, who are looking at solar dynamics, what's happening on the sun, how the sun's activity as it goes through these sort of roughly 11-year solar cycles, changes the solar wind, which blows over the planet. And when the solar wind is strong, it protects us from the impact of cosmic radiation. And as the wind dies back, when the sun is going into solar minima, we get bombarded by a lot more cosmic radiation than we normally do. And we're just about to reach solar minima probably next year now on the current cycle.
Yeah, wow.
And there's good evidence. There's a study which was done by a Danish guy. I guess it was probably, 10 or 15 years ago now that he did this research, but he found that as cosmic radiation increases, cloud cover increases on the planet, because the little ionized particles which are flying in from space, they create seeds for water droplets to form and create clouds. So
that kind of makes sense, I suppose, because it's more protection.
Yeah. So during these periods of solar minima where there's higher cosmic radiation, the planet generally cools down, not just because the sun's quiet, but also because there is more cloud forming around the planet to cool us down. Yeah.
So would you say that it's become a bit like we've lost a bit of nuance in this conversation because it's been polarized a little bit? You've got climate change supporters, climate change deniers, and if you're a climate denier, you're an idiot and you don't love the planet. And then climate change is all about helping the planet out. Because you strike me as a person that really cares about the environment.
I do. I do.
So I wouldn't look at you and be like, oh, he's a climate denier. He wants to get more oil out of the earth. I don't get that impression from you at all.
No. It's a complex situation. Part of it is the result of the modern scientific industrial era and this narrow specialization of professions. But part of it is also due to the way that human consciousness is changing. And so we're actually in the middle of, according to my assessment, a shift in human consciousness right now that's taking us beyond the modern era, beyond that scientific industrial kind of thinking, to a more humanistic, network-centric kind of being human, right?
Yeah, I really wanted to ask you about this because that was a super interesting talk that you gave. But one question that I wanted to get out of the way first before I even let you get on a roll was, where is this research come from? Because most people, like when you hear, our consciousness is shifting again, you start going, oh, God, here's a bearded hippie trying to tell me some weird shit again.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just not introduced to this idea at all. I've heard about it over the past few years in passing, and a lot of it actually from psychedelic people in the psychedelic world. I read this great book called Breaking Open the Head. Have you ever read that? Yeah, Daniel Pinchbeck. Yeah. And it's a great book. He does this really incredible journalistic work, and then he kind of goes off the rails. Totally off the rails after that. And then it's sad because it's like it takes away how good of work he did with Breaking Open the Head, because his
it's boundary pushing stuff, and I think whenever we're pushing the boundaries of our knowledge, we'll get to the point where we've put all this information together and come up with something useful, but then the further we push the boundaries, the more we, get loose and don't have any structure,
It can get lost.
Yeah.
So you cite a bunch of references in your talk of people that are saying this, but so when you said that we're entering this new phase, we're entering this new shift, what's the evidence to support that? Like, where are you getting that information from?
I guess the core evidence comes from some research by an American professor of psychology called Dr. Clare W Graves, and he was around in the 1950s and 60s as a professor teaching psychology in upstate New York.
Okay, cool.
And he was a contemporary of Abraham Maslow, who's quite a well-known psychologist, of course, and his hierarchy of human needs, is well-known. But Graves used to teach at that time about 5 different theories of human psychology, which all had different angles on, how do our minds work, And inevitably, at the end of a course, one of his students would kind of stick up their hand and say, Dr. Graves, you've taught us these 5 different theories. Which one's right? And he had trouble with that. He couldn't answer it, so he decided to do his own research. And his research was very interesting in that he didn't start with a hypothesis and then try and prove it, right? So he didn't have a fixed idea of what the nature of human consciousness was. He started with a question, and the question was, what is the nature of a psychologically mature adult?
So he kind of went at it with a philosophical approach.
Yeah, very much so. And he was way ahead of his time. I think of him as like the Einstein of psychology, but he's not well known because he actually died before he published his work academically. So
Damn.
He spent 9 years studying over 1,000 people and not just looking at their opinions on, what an adult, a psychologically mature adult was like and how they behaved, but also watching their behavior and watching how those things changed over the course of 9 years, and gathered an amazing amount of very interesting data. And he used all sorts of different data gathering techniques, like he would get students at the university to write essays on this. He would actually watch their behavior. In fact, I think it's on record that he set up a two-way mirror somewhere inside the university and stood behind it sometimes and watched people's behaviour without their knowledge, which these days probably wouldn't be ethically accepted. And he also did things like reaction time testing, where he would put symbols and words and things up on a TV screen and then ask somebody to react in a particular way and see how long it took them to react to different things. And so he was a guy well ahead of his time, and he started to write a couple of articles here and there and do some public speaking towards the later years. He was, as I understand it, not really accepted by his peers because, there was this fixed idea of human psychology back then.
Freudian, Jungian.
Yeah, and he was pushing the limits, He was saying things that didn't fit with the accepted viewpoint. And so I think he came under a lot of criticism. And then eventually, 1986, he passed away from a heart attack. And he'd started writing a book, which I guess was his thesis, some of which has survived.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been able to study. But because he didn't get published academically, his work is not accepted by the academic world because it hasn't been peer-reviewed properly.
Damn.
Yet it's pure gold, I think.
Can it go through that process now?
I'm not an academic, so I'm not probably the right person to be asking that question, but I don't think so. I think someone else would have to pick up where he left off and then submit it. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's so interesting. Isn't that a shame? Like, it's so funny. The people that have to break the mold for new ideas are always the ones that get shit on.
It's usually the case. I think historically, if you look at the pathfinders, look at Tesla as an example. There was a guy, again, way, way ahead of his time. And he got canned for it, basically. Yeah. It's often the case.
And so what's the theory then on this kind of shift of consciousness? How much time have we got, really?
I know. I guess in simple terms, one of his central findings was that we grow through these layers or stages of consciousness. He really didn't use the word consciousness. He was coming from a developmental psychology perspective. And consciousness is a very big word anyway, so I think we need to qualify that. I mean, there are lots of different facets of consciousness, so let's stick to exactly what he was writing. And he was writing about developmental stages
of the human psyche.
Of the human psyche, yeah.
Okay.
And what he found was that there was this correlation between the complexity of our life conditions and the dynamic, adaptive nature of our consciousness. And whatever level of complexity existed within our life conditions, our consciousness or our psyche would adapt to match that, to adapt to be able to solve the complexity of the problems that were being thrown at us, right? And when we have that balance between our own capacity and the challenges that life is throwing at us, then things are stable, and life is good, and we feel like we're on top of things.
Yeah.
But inevitably, our life conditions trend towards greater complexity, and this seems to be a trend that's pretty consistent across the universe. Is that everything is slowly getting more complex, right? Since the Big Bang.
Do you think that that's an inspiration and exhalation, that things will get more complex and then they'll simplify again and then get more complex and simplify? Or are we infinitely going to complexity?
Look, I tend towards what you just described. I think in a very, very long-term sense, it's a polarity, like an inhale-exhale kind of a pattern, yeah. And a lot of other philosophers, people like Ken Wilber, for example, do say that also.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of thing that we can necessarily prove in this physical universe right now. It would take a long time. But,
millions
but I
of
think
years.
it's quite likely because when you look at the wisdom traditions that have been running, as long as recorded history, which are put together by people who make serious inquiry into these things, they go by the adage, as above, so below, so whatever pattern you see in the bigger picture, it also applies right down to the smallest picture.
Yeah, I had a lady on here a while ago who's an artist that works with fractals.
Yeah.
And it's just such a beautiful concept, but it's a hard thing to get your head around. I understand, it took me talking to her 3 times or so to really start to see, oh, I get what you mean by fractals. I mean, I had this gross experience where I did something embarrassing on the podcast and then had to kind of take it back or whatever. And what I realized made me feel so gross about it was that if any random person had stumbled across my podcast and listened to that episode only and didn't know me and didn't know anything else, and they just listened to that episode, I would feel uncomfortable with the way that represented me as a person and the podcast as a whole. So that's why I didn't like it. And I was trying to understand what that meant. And what I realized is that each episode of this podcast is a fractal of the purpose of the podcast and the meaning of the podcast. And then that's all a fractal of a meaning of my life.
Yeah.
And that's a fractal of the meaning of my development or growth in terms of the human race and general consciousness and whatever the fuck we're trying to do here. Like, what is the purpose of life? So as silly as it seems, like each episode of the podcast, or even me just sitting down to think to have a podcast, these are all little tiny fractals in the grand scheme of things. So if one of those little fractals is off or the wrong color or points the wrong direction, it makes me feel uncomfortable because it's not aligned overall to my general purpose. And that kind of just hit me like a stone, like, oh, that's what we mean by fractals. If each piece is in more or less alignment with a general thing that we're trying to do, things feel relatively good. You feel like you're on track and you feel like you're going well. But when you get off track, it's because those things, either you don't have this kind of general alignment to something greater than you, or you don't really know where you're going.
Yeah, I kind of come from the angle that everything is perfect, and even when things feel like they're not perfect, they actually are. It's just a matter of our perspective, right? And a fractal is simply a pattern that repeats at different scales. It doesn't matter whether you look at the tiniest piece of the pattern, you're going to see the same shape as you would if you stood back and looked at a larger aspect of the pattern. So it just repeats. And so, if you take that podcast as an example of a little kind of gnarly bit of the pattern, then it's a true representation of what the pattern is, the pattern being you in this case, right?
Yeah.
But we have the capacity to change these patterns, and that's the beauty of human consciousness, is it's ultimately creative.
Yeah.
And, depending on what kind of feedback we're aware of and our capacity to process and act on that, then if we want to change that fractal pattern, we can change it.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And so the idea of evolution, like in the simplistic terms, when you think of evolution, it's the animal's ability to adapt to their environment. But we often, the sentence stops there, adapt to the environment, full stop. But nobody's really wondering how the environment is changing and then how the species is adapting to it. Because it's not that it's how the species adapts to that immediate environment. If that environment is constantly changing, which as we well know it is, because we're only bits of the environment, we are the environment. So our influence on the environment and vice versa is going to be changing us in a symbiotic way. We're not exclusive to that. It's not that I need to adapt to this environment I'm in. It's like whatever I'm doing is going to have a feedback loop.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the aspects of Clare Graves's theory that he came up with was that we grow through these layers or stages, right? And they're not discrete items. They're actually nested inside each other, just like the sort of skin is layered on an onion.
Yeah. Okay.
So the lower stages or layers are wrapped by, each higher layer or stage that emerges wraps around what's already there, so it becomes a composite of the whole piece. And so each one of these layers or stages comes with a certain perspective, and as we grow to higher layers or stages, our perspective gets bigger and bigger and bigger with each different step up, right? And so whoever came up with that idea about us being organisms that are evolving in an environment, was looking at it from a particular perspective or at a particular scale. And the further up you go, the broader your perspective becomes, then you might start to see the environment and the organism as one thing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful idea, and it makes a lot of sense. So you've got this kind of, I wonder about this perspective because it happens in me as your life moves on. You can kind of look back at moments, because when you're, say, 1 to 6 years old, your perspective of the experience of life is only 6 years old.
Yeah.
So 6 minutes in a 6-year lifespan is massive compared to 6 minutes in a 30-year lifespan or 6 minutes in a 90-year lifespan. So percentage-wise, each significant moment to you becomes less significant as you have experienced more moments or whatever. And so that kind of makes sense. Like the more recorded history we can reflect on and look back for, we can develop perspectives all around that as we get further and further away from those moments.
Yeah, interestingly though, the way that we process those perspectives changes. So it's not a linear pattern. So in the earlier stages of our life, we're primarily living according to our urges and instincts and emotions, okay? So that's our primary information input system, and it's how we respond is through those same things.
And this is your monkey brain, is it? Or is it the reptilian brain, isn't it?
Well, it's ultimately, like at the lowest level, it's the reptilian brain, but as humans, we're born with a brain that also has an emotional system in it as well. I guess in the very early stages, as a newborn, we would be primarily just living from instinct, right? We're not really thinking about how we feel about something. We just cry if we're hungry, we sleep if we're tired, that kind of stuff. And then as we grow and our brains develop, we do develop this capacity for emotion, and in what I call the pre-rational zone of our growth, which is the first 3 layers in Graves's model, we're driven by those things, basically our urges, instincts, our needs, emotions and responses. So that's why with a young child, if you ask them to reason, they generally can't reason at an early age. You can't say to them, okay, here's a chocolate, I'm going to put it on the table here, but don't eat it now because then you won't be hungry when it's dinner time. But what's the kid going to do? Most kids are just going to eat the chocolate because they can't think about that cause and effect process. That's a rational-minded activity, and the rational mind kicks in later on in life.
And did the rational mind also evolved later inside our heads?
Well, yeah, it did. I mean, if one of the things about Graves's model, which is amazing, is it's like a fractal pattern.
Right, that's what I was just thinking. Yeah,
so you can look at your growth to your present age, and then you can also look at the evolution of humanity and see the same patterns playing out. So in our early stages, when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were traditional tribal people, and then moving into being warlike people, like Genghis Khan type folks who just, traveled the land conquering other people. We were primarily driven
British
by
people.
We were primarily driven by those basic things, by our basic needs, our urges and instincts. And if we wanted to do something, then we'd do it now, right?
Yeah.
And it was only really with the agricultural revolution around that time, roughly 10, 12,000 years ago, where we figured out how to farm on a large scale. That allowed us to live in larger groups than we could before. So we started to get towns and cities, and that increased the complexity. So there's our life conditions increasing in complexity, throwing up more complex problems, and that was one of the things which, Graves' theory is that the complexity drives our development. So if he's right, then it was that increasing complexity that caused our rational mind to kick in and take charge.
Okay.
And that really gave us the capacity to think about cause and effect and to rationalize things and rationalize our fears away, for example. So when we're in that pre-rational zone, our fears are quite powerful.
Yeah, they guided everything. Like, I see a tiger, run.
They could, yeah. And so it takes the rational mind to step in and say, okay, now I know this feels scary, but actually it's not. So just put that fear back in the box and let's go ahead and do it, right?
And there was quite a big jump in brain development around that time, wasn't it? Like no evolutionary biologist really has come up with a provable theory as to why our brain doubled in size, or was it tripled in size at that point in time?
I'm not on top of the brain size development, so I can't comment on that. But what I can say is that around that same time that we're talking about here, around the agricultural revolution, and the kicking in of the rational mind as dominant, that coincided with the development of the frontal lobes of the brain, which are sort of pivotal in this rational process.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, of moderating the lower.
I mean, it does absolutely make sense. Now that we understand what we know about neuroplasticity, I talked about this a little bit a couple podcasts ago, but it's the idea generally that your brain can rewrite itself with new information.
Yeah.
When we get new experiences, we have to deal with them some way, and through repetitive exposure to this thing, we will create new brain channels for it. So that's so interesting. We're literally growing our brain to deal with a problem.
That's right. And although, in Graves' time, this term neuroplasticity didn't exist, but basically he was writing about that same process, we are ultimately adaptive.
Yeah. Because it's the stoned ape theory, is the idea that as we moved out of the trees and into the plains, and became more agricultural, we were following cows around, or having cows nearby us more often.
Yeah.
And psychedelic mushrooms grow in cow shit, so the hunter-gatherers were starting to eat mushrooms, and that's what developed language. I think that's Terence McKinney's theory,
that's Terence's idea, yeah.
Yeah.
And, who knows whether that's true or not. I mean, there's another idea which is pretty radical, that we had intervention by extraterrestrial
I've heard that
races,
too, yeah.
Which impacted our evolution also, yeah.
What's that theory?
Well, I guess it depends who you listen to, but one theory is that extraterrestrials visited the planet, interbred with our predecessors, thereby creating, a new type of DNA that was part our predecessors and part extraterrestrial. And there's some scientific evidence which seems to fit in line with that idea.
That's so mental.
I mean, I think probably most people have heard about this idea of the missing link in our evolutionary progression, and the fact that our predecessors have got 24 chromosome pairs and we only have 23. And one of our genes, I think it's number 2, if I'm right, but I'm not a scientist with this stuff, so I'm drawing on other people's work. But one of our genes has an unusual structure in that the strand which makes them up is normally ended like it has a cap on the top and the bottom of the strand, which is something called a telomere. Mm-hmm. And all of our genes have this structure except for one, which has 2 telomeres right in the middle of the strand, as if 2 different strands have been fused together.
Whoa.
Yeah, and no science has really explained why that is the case. So I personally lean towards this theory that there was some kind of extraterrestrial intervention and interbreeding that shaped who we are today. And
that's what, 10,000 years ago? No, it was much older than that.
Well,
that's agriculture was 10,000, right?
Yeah, the best description that I've heard is that the initial intervention happened about 200,000 years ago, which was when modern humans first appeared.
Okay.
But there was some ongoing interaction, and particularly around the explosion of culture, which happened about 50,000 years ago, which is what Terence talks about, possibly being related to psychedelic use.
Yeah.
Was, for 150,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers and we made very simple tools out of stone and didn't do much more. But about 50,000 years ago, there was this sudden explosion of art and culture, and we started living together in tribes. And, there's no clear indication of what might have triggered that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's so interesting, man. That's mad.
It is very interesting.
What is that gene responsible for?
I'm not sure.
That'd be interesting to know, what does it actually do in us?
Yeah.
And how much of an impact it would have. I fucking imagine that if we're all half alien.
If anybody wants to follow it up, Greg Braden, who's an American author and speaker, talks about that. So you can look at Greg Braden's work.
Yeah, okay.
I think in his latest book he's talking about that. And also, and this is a bit left field, but there's a guy called Lee Carroll from the US who channels like a medium. You know what that is?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, like has some disincarnate personality speaking through him.
Wow.
He has been doing that, and Lee Carroll's an engineer. He's not some, new age guy. He's been doing that and delivering these messages from an entity called Kryon, Kryon, for I think nearly 30 years now.
What?
And he actually has an amazing record of predicting scientific breakthroughs where
Oh
he's been sitting and allowing this voice to speak through him, and the voice has said, there's this scientific breakthrough coming and it's about this, watch out for it. And he's got a solid record with that. So, what's going on there? Something I think it's worth paying attention to.
Wow, that's so mad.
I actually just went down to Hobart in the last 2 weeks and went to visit Lee Carroll at an event down there and listened to him doing this for the first time. It's the first time I've ever seen him do it face to face. Yeah.
I've watched people do that before. I've seen it on a podcast, and I used to watch the videos of, I think her name is Dolores Cannon.
Yeah, right.
She does a thing like that. Yeah, it's pretty funny. It is pretty mental. Who the fuck knows what the hell's going on there? Who are we to judge?
I know.
It's mad.
Yeah.
It's definitely mental, but it's mental only for our perspective, because it's like, what the fuck is that?
I know. Like I come from a pretty grounded background. I was in the army for 15 years, and I try to take a very, very grounded approach to these things. But I've had a lot of experiences in my life where strange stuff happens, and sometimes through the use of psychedelics. And, I think you've just got to take things on face value. And if something is presented to you in a way that you really can't deny, then it only
roll with it for now.
Yeah, roll with it,
Yeah. You did something interesting that's just come to mind about that is that, so you were saying that he's predicted sort of technological inventions and then they come about.
Yeah.
We were talking just before about the idea that our brain adapts to the environment that's around us and vice versa. This is a feedback loop.
Yes.
How much of that stuff, when just somebody having an idea and putting it out there in the world, how much of that is possible for manifesting that idea and then bringing it back? And I don't mean like, I'm going to win the lottery and then you try and manifest that in your life. I mean literally like thinking about something and saying it out loud. I think we're going to have a technological advancement in this thing.
Yeah. How
much did that start triggering people to start looking into it and then they make it happen?
Well, of course it would. I mean, as soon as somebody starts talking about something new and it's a popular idea and it goes viral, clearly you're gonna have a whole bunch of other people thinking about it, right?
Yeah,
so it just makes sense. And there have been instances of this, particularly around athletic achievements over the years, where somebody's broken a record, and then within quick succession, a whole bunch of other people will break the same record. It's like somebody's laid down a pathway, that takes us beyond the boundary, and then all of a sudden it becomes accessible to other people.
Yeah. We've seen that a lot with I used to do like slope style skiing and snowboarding, and it's like as soon as one person lands a 1440, then all of a sudden everybody can do a 1440. It's almost like you have to know that it's some person tells you it's possible, and then everybody's like, oh fuck it, maybe I can do that.
Yeah, when I was in the army, I remember on at least one occasion somebody doing something that was just like out of the ordinary, amazing, and often it was some young soldier or officer, and somebody would say, wait, you can't do that. And then someone else would say, yeah, but nobody told him.
Yeah, he didn't know. No one told me he couldn't do that. Now he can.
Yeah.
And then that isn't that cool, because it's like, just by you taking the chance and trying something new, you're providing a step for everyone else to jump up with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes, if we listen to other people too much, we can convince ourselves that something isn't possible, which actually means, well, we can't do it because we don't believe we can do it.
Yeah. And this is I think of one of the major dangers of people. Oh, excellent. We got a garbage truck here.
Hey.
That'll be real obnoxious. But yeah, like that, the idea that we can make the change by just pushing ourselves out there forward, then we bring whatever that is out into being.
Yeah.
And by not questioning science and accepting that science is a fact and this is it. And I appreciate it. I'm not a person that's going to sit here and say that doctors don't know what they're talking about or whatever. I mean, I think that's insane. There's a lot of history and time and effort that's been into creating the models of the universe and way we know them. But it doesn't mean that they're immutable. It doesn't mean that they can't be questioned and looked at and retried in new ways as we get better technology, whatever.
Yeah.
And it has to be done that way, because this is the real danger, is that like so Clare Graves is talking about this evolution of the species, but if we stop questioning And we allow these rigid structures to stop us from wondering if we can get to that next level. Maybe that next level doesn't exist. Maybe we kill ourselves before it even happens. Maybe we just calcify, like a crustacean. We just build up these shells of protection around us because it's too scary to take that leap.
Yeah, and I'm sure there have been many cases of that kind of thing happening, whether it be in individual lives. I mean, we've seen it. We've all seen it. You've seen somebody who's just become terribly fearful and rigid about their attitude to life. They lock themselves down. They don't interact, and eventually they die that way, in a closed state. And Graves, in his research, he wrote that people can be open, arrested, or closed in terms of their capacity to adapt, to take in information from the environment and then adapt to the challenges, that they're being faced with.
Yeah.
And if we're open, it's like an open system where information can flow into and out of the system, and the system can respond, react, adapt to new information, right? Simple things like you walk out in the sun, you feel your skin getting burnt, you put a shirt and a hat on or something like that. I mean, that's an example of you being an open system. You're receiving information, you're taking note of it, you're adapting, in a responsible or a sensible way. And sometimes people can get psychologically into a state where they just close their minds. They no longer listen to new information. And one of the ways you can identify these sorts of people is they tend to try and use the same solutions to a problem even when the problem has changed, it's the old sort of thing of thinking everything's a nail, so you hit it with a hammer.
Yeah.
But then you come across a screw and you hit it with a hammer. It's not quite the same.
Yeah, it doesn't quite do it.
So that's what happens when we get closed. Is we start to do things that are inappropriate, and those things become less and less effective. And we're actually seeing this large scale right now around the planet because we're in this shift that I've been talking about beyond the modern scientific industrial era to what's next. And we're seeing all of the systems that were designed during the scientific industrial era become less effective, like our economic systems, our political systems, people are trying the same old solutions that we've used for the last 300 years, but the world has changed. The world is different than it was when those systems were designed. So they don't work anymore.
Yeah, it's like letting go of a monarchy. We all were once ruled by kings and queens and rulers and dictators or whatever, and then we slowly realized that probably wasn't the best way to go. But it is funny because I thought about this once when somebody was asking me when Donald Trump was running for president. They were like, what would you do if he actually won? And I was like, as bad and nihilistic as it is, I couldn't give a fuck one way or the other, because the one model is that we have this pretend human that stands there and says things off of a script in a really rigid suit, and they just say a bunch of bullshit that they think the people want to hear. Behind the scenes, they're run by a bunch of money. They don't give a fuck about people. All they're doing is creating a bigger and bigger gap between the people that are struggling, and we just run this government system that is a quote unquote government system that's not here to help the people, and it never has been. And we always have to have these civil rights uprising to fucking slap them in the face every once in a while and be like, we hired you. We hired you to do a job for us, and you don't give a shit. And what's so frustrating about it is that, the Barack Obamas, the Hillary Clintons, the Bill Clintons, they're sitting there looking at you going like, no, we're here to help you. And you're like, bitch, you're not.
Yeah.
You never have been.
Yeah.
You're dropping drones with our money constantly on people that we have nothing against. And yet you're telling me that you're steering this ship. You're taking care of this ship for me, and you're not. And so that's one hand. And so Hillary Clinton gets hired. Yep, it's the same old bullshit. We're going to keep going on the same old road. And I think that it was her downfall, is instead of her adapting to the new situation, she and the Democratic Party were like, no, we're sticking clear. What they should have done was gone with Bernie Sanders and just realized that, he's a bit out there. I mean, slightly out there compared to everybody else, but I mean, only slightly, just because he had new ideas. He was adapting.
Yeah.
And then the other option is this fucking wacko who doesn't give a fuck about anything. He doesn't care about the institution of it because he thinks he's untouchable. And he's a maniac. He's just an absolute pure maniac. But what I think it did, and I think the benefit of it is, if we can learn anything from this, is not, we need to get out and vote. It is, we've shown the ludicrous nature of the situation of president, that this is absolutely insanely ludicrous, that we would trust this one human, whether they're Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, that we would trust one of them to make decisions on our behalf is fucking bullshit at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's Trump's role, in the bigger picture, is he's there to make change. That's why he's appeared. He's kind of like the court jester,
Yes,
back in the days of like kings and queens, no one would want to offend the king or the queen.
Mm-hmm.
So often they didn't get told the truth. And it was the court jester was always the one who could, through humor, actually reveal the truth, and say something that was real.
Yeah.
So that was like a trip switch, to release the tension and get the truth flowing. And Trump is like that. He's playing that role.
But he's not saying the truth necessarily. I would hold the truth to a higher standard than
well, Trump,
I care about the truth.
The thing about Trump is, I guess some people might say that he's not very smart. But what smart president would collapse the existing system so a better system can be built? No smart president was going to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You need a guy who's like the fool from the tarot card deck, that character, who naively stumbles in and accidentally does the right thing. And that's Trump all over. I'm not saying that everything he's doing is right, but ultimately what he's doing is he's collapsing the old system. Yeah. And at a time when evolution is calling us to change our systems and move to something that's better, more effective, that meets the modern challenges that we're facing.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And it is gross. It's hard to watch, and it as with anything, you have your own kind of mental earthquakes every once in a while. It fucking hurts. You got to get slapped in the face and realize you're a dick sometimes, and it's not good. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, well, now how can I change from this? And this is what's worrying me a little bit, is the polarity that's developing out of it. It's like you're going to turn, is that everyone's latching on to really simplified versions of right and wrong suddenly, because I think this tends to happen, it seems like, when there's a lot of change going on. That's sort of cling on to things that seem like, no, this is right. You're left wing, I'm right wing. That's it. That's all there is. I'm a man, you're a woman, and it was like, it's like, hold on, we are losing an opportunity to learn a lesson here where we are not just one of these things. What we need to see now is nuance.
Yeah, and this, that dynamic you just explained is documented in Clare Graves' work. So he found that when we go through change from one of these paradigms or layers or stages to the next, it shifts our fundamental interaction with reality, like the deepest subconscious ways that we make sense of reality change, okay? And to go through that change, what has to happen is things have to fall apart. You can't, if you think of like a kid's Lego block toy, if it's a ship, you can't snap your fingers and change it into an airplane. You've got to pull the blocks apart, put it back together in a different way. So that has to happen to us as individuals. Our psyche has to loosen up and become plastic enough to change radically. And our society needs to do the same thing. Our social systems need to change. So they need, to some extent, to fail to the point where we say, okay, we have to rebuild this in a different way. And so what happens personally for us when we start to go through this change process, we feel like something's not right. We wake up one morning and we go, something doesn't feel right today. I was really happy and everything was good yesterday, but today it's different. And we usually don't know what the cause is, but we just know that we feel different. And as that sort of tension starts to build, we start to think, okay, things aren't right. I can't keep living life the way that I have been. I've got to change. So maybe I'll think back to like 10 years ago when things were different and I was living life a different way, right? And if I go back to that, maybe things will be cool again like they used to be, right? So, and then you hear this language in the politicians' speeches of, we've got to get back to basics. We've got to get, down to brass tacks.
Make America great
again. Let's get back to our original values. Make America great again, And this is that natural human response is things aren't right. Let's go back to the way they were. Okay? So I call this the slingshot effect. Because what it does is it actually creates more tension. When we go back to an older way of doing things, it's less complex. It's even less capable of dealing with these more complex challenges that are getting thrown up with us to us. And so it's like pulling back on an elastic band on a slingshot. Okay, you've got to create that tension. You've got to pull it backwards and create more and more and more tension until it gets to the point where it can shoot you forward fast enough to get where you need to go. Yeah.
Wow.
And that's what we're seeing globally at the moment. That's why things look like they're going backwards, because they are. That elastic band is being pulled backwards. The tension is building and building and building, and it's going to get to the point where, and this will probably happen multiple times, where, you know, the tension will be too much and it'll release and there'll be some big change happen. And we're going to see that happen over and over again in different aspects of society and within ourselves as well. Yeah.
What do you think it is in some people that have this resistance to change, that seem to be more resistant to change than some others? Like some people can kind of adapt to that feeling a little bit quicker than other people. Or
yeah, it really depends on their starting point. So in Graves's work, he mapped out 8 different layers or stages of consciousness that we can grow through. And he didn't think that was the full story. He actually decided that this is actually an open-ended system. You know, there's going to be more than 8. And as the world gets more complex, there'll be new, more complex layers added to our capacity. And it depends on where an individual is at in that spectrum in terms of how they will respond to change. Because I think there's this common sort of feeling globally that humanity has evolved to a certain point, everybody's at that point, and we're all moving to the same place, you know, whatever that next place might be. But in fact, Graves's work didn't show that at all. He showed that there's actually a spectrum depending on the complexity of someone's life conditions. Like, say, if they live in a country town, they don't have technology, life's pretty simple. You know, they can keep doing the same thing over and over again and it works. Their mindset, their perspective on the world is going to be adapted in a certain way. That means they won't cope with change very well because they don't normally get change much, right? Whereas if someone's living in an intense environment where they're living in close proximity to a whole bunch of other people, you know, let's say New York City, where things are changing all the time, like every day you've got to be ready to adapt to some new thing that you might encounter in your day-to-day life, then your consciousness is going to adapt to be responsive, you know, and to expect change. And so depending on what your starting point is on this spectrum, your response to change is going to be different. And you might, you know, if you're not used to change, then you might just kind of deny it for a while and say, oh, no, that's okay, I'm fine. You know, it's like that cartoon of the dog sitting in the bar that's burning, you know, saying, I'm fine, everything's good.
Everything's all good.
Yeah, it's only when your ass starts to burn that you actually move and do something.
Yeah, you're forced to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and is there ways that you that people can change that in themselves? You know, like if they're having a really hard time dealing with change, are there things that they can do to...
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of my primary interests, is looking at different methodologies and technologies for accelerating change, because I think we're going to need them, you know, in the times ahead. And there's a lot of good research. For example, there's research into contemplative states like meditation and how they can actually accelerate your personal change over time. So regular meditators tend to be more adaptive and able to change.
Why is that, I wonder? Because you were saying before that if you are, you know, surrounded by people and a lot of stuff going on, it makes you more adapted to change. But if you isolate yourself and be quiet and spend your time on yourself, you are also more adapted to change. Why is that?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is this idea of altered states, right? So if you think of being in one of these layers of consciousness as having a certain construct, a certain expectation of reality being the way that it is, and you know, whether you're sort of closed or open is also going to play a part here, your own personal kind of state there. Then if you practice regularly collapsing that structure, okay, then you'll become nimble. It's like an athlete who trains, right? The more you train, the more nimble you can become doing any particular thing. So if you have a regular practice that changes your state of consciousness into something different and then brings you back again, then it's like exercising a muscle. And so all of the methodologies and technologies that I'm finding that are useful for accelerating our own development seem to be involving some kind of altered state, you know, and it's not always drugs. It can be meditation, it can be exercise, it can be food-induced, all sorts of different things. Yeah.
And so, I guess if we touch on psychedelics a little bit, because you're obviously not recommending that everyone just goes and eats a tab of acid.
No, don't try this at home.
What kind of transformative states are you finding through drugs? Mostly because you've been looking into MDMA-assisted psychotherapy stuff. Yeah,
so I'm co-founder of a non-profit organisation here in Australia called Psychedelic Research in Science and Medicine, which was really, the initiation of that organisation was in large part due to Rick Doblin, who's the founder of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies in the US. So some folks here in Australia who started a community interest group in Melbourne, I think it was back in about 2003, thereabouts, who were mainly a bunch of people interested in psychoactive plants to start with that used to just come together and swap plants and talk about, using them, that kind of thing. And that grew into what is now an organisation called Entheogenesis Australis, or EGA for short. And EGA have been running psychedelic symposiums for years now, and they've become world-class. They're really, really good. And so some of the people from EGA travelled overseas and met with Rick Doblin and, spoke about what's happening in the US and how we might be able to do something similar here. They invited Rick to come speak at the 2010 psychedelic symposium that EGA put on in Melbourne. And I actually saw a media report about the fact that Rick was coming, and it mentioned the MDMA research, which was looking at using it to treat PTSD. And I was in Byron Bay at the time, and I decided to travel down to Melbourne and go to that psychedelic symposium, and it was really, really good. And while Rick was talking, he offered some money to help us start a research organisation here in Australia. So that's how PRISM got started.
Right.
And I was one of the people who volunteered to help with that process. So we formalised it in 2011. We very quickly tried to kind of jump in the pool and swim, which in hindsight was, I guess commendable but somewhat naive of us, because none of us had any experience in drug development or the process that you need to go through to get a new drug approved. Yeah. We jumped in the pool and found out that we couldn't swim all that well, and then we kind of pulled back a bit and started a longer journey of trying to get some psychedelic research happening here in Australia. And it's been a long road because there's been a lot of pushback from institutions here. And really, I think it's partly a generational thing, but it's about the particular mindsets that are normal here in Australia, and again, it's all tied into Clare Graves's different layers of consciousness. This idea that has been pushed really strongly since the war on drugs was declared in the US, that drugs are bad, and everything is clumped under this word drugs. It doesn't matter if you're talking about cocaine or heroin or MDMA, it's drugs, right? Yeah. Yet they're radically different substances that have radically different effects. And so we've been knocking on doors and saying, we want to do this research. Can you support us? And we've just been getting nope. We can't do that. No, or we couldn't be seen to be doing that. Imagine the public image. And a lot of the institutions that we approached were worried about their funding base. Like if they're seen to be publicly supporting drugs, they might have their funding withdrawn and that kind of thing. So it's been a matter of some very real fears. And it's only since late last year, so late 2017, that some doors have really started to open for us. Cool. And we had, in quick succession, it's like someone flicked a switch somewhere, people coming to us offering us money to help what we're doing. We had a university actually step up and say, okay, we're interested in this. We had a hospital approach us, a major hospital, saying, we think we'd like to research this. Can you work with us? So,
and it's mostly MDMA-assisted psychotherapy trials for PTSD.
It's that, and also we are working in the area of psilocybin-assisted therapy to treat near-death anxiety. Yeah, so there's been some really good research done in the US around that with terminally ill patients, and basically giving them a spiritual experience using psilocybin, which opens them up to the possibility that death is not the end, but it's just a new beginning. Right? Yeah.
There's many things that I wanted to say about that I'm really curious about. First of all, I'm so grateful that you guys didn't give up when you jumped into the pool and then you failed. Yeah. Because I think that's I mean, that's such a commendable act because it is fucking scary. And there's a lot of stigma around it. I mean, when I start talking about drugs to people, straight away everybody's just like, you fucking idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. And I get it. Yeah, sometimes I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But the amount of research, and this is kind of what I wanted to ask, was if you could give us some background on the actual benefits that they've been finding from PTSD. Like, why is this an important thing to pursue? Why was it worth pursuing?
If you go back and look at the history of MDMA, it was developed, I think it was around like 1913, 1914 by Merck, the pharmaceutical company, and it was put on the shelf. And then the US military looked at it, I think in the 1950s, as maybe a truth serum or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
But it didn't go anywhere. And then it was a US chemist by the name of Alexander Shulgin, Sasha Shulgin as he was known.
I have his book. I've got PCAL. Yeah, it's
cool.
A great book.
Yeah, so he pulled it off the shelf and checked it out and found that it was amazing. And then he started to give it out to friends of his who were working as counselors and psychologists for use in therapy work. They got really, really good results from it. But then eventually it escaped into the recreational drug world. I think it was a guy from Texas who started mass-producing pills and then sort of giving them out for free at nightclubs and that kind of thing. Mm. It all got out of control, and then eventually the government cracked down, and I think it was made illegal in the US in 1985. And so Rick Doblin then was a young, counterculture guy, draft dodger who stumbled on, MDMA before it was made illegal and found it amazing. He decided he wanted to be an MDMA therapist, and then the government made it illegal, So he started pretty much straight away. He started MAPS, and he started on this mission just to overcome the legal restrictions and get this made a legal medicine.
Because the kind of stuff that they were finding, I mean, their very first trial, I don't remember the exact statistics, you might be able to help clarify for me, but their first trial of PTSD, treating people with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and for everybody who doesn't know how this worked, it was that they give them either potentially a placebo, and the doctor doesn't know this, the therapist doesn't know who's getting what. They give them either a placebo or they give them a medium, high, or low dose of MDMA. And this is your very pure MDMA that came from a chemist, not from the guy around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And they'd put a eye mask on them, lay them down, let them listen to music, and then just if the person wanted to talk, they could talk. These were 4 to 8 hour sessions, and they'd keep the person there for 8 hours and let them talk through stuff. And this was people that were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder that nothing else had worked for them. All antidepressants, every other treatment had not worked for them. And they had something, I can't remember, but it was somewhere around 80% success rate.
Yeah, just over 80% in the first trial.
Fucking insane.
It is amazing. And, the exact mechanism of how MDMA does this, we still don't really know, but what we can say is that when people are given MDMA in the right setting, and the treatment is a series of 11 therapeutic sessions plus a 12th longer-term follow-up session. And during those sessions, the patient works with a therapy pair, a male and a female, and it's been Michael and Annie Mithofer have been the pioneers of this work with MAPS, and Michael's a psychiatrist and Annie's a registered nurse, and they're a married couple, and they're old trippers from the 60s, so they know what they're doing. And what they know is that under the right circumstances and within this structured, supportive system of a whole range of sessions, if you give somebody MDMA, then it can put them into a comfort zone. And normally somebody who has had PTSD, if they start to think about the traumatic events which resulted in PTSD, they immediately get anxious. They act as if the trauma is happening right now, not 10, 20, 30 years ago. And what MDMA does, it allows them to think about those traumatic events but not feel as if it's happening right now, okay? So they're in this kind of comfort zone where I can think about that, I can remember what happened, I can talk about it, but I don't feel anxious. And that is extraordinary. That somehow enables this remarkable healing process. And my own, as a war veteran myself, who's suffered from PTSD and been in hospital with it, and who's also experienced this MDMA healing, I can say that it felt to me like it created a kind of a plasticity in my central nervous system, and it was able to rewire itself. That's what it felt like to me. Wow. Whether that's actually what's happening scientifically, we don't formally know, but that was my feeling. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What was it like for you? What was your experience like?
My experience wasn't typical. So I had what they call complex PTSD, which resulted from a number of different occurrences over the years. I was accidentally poisoned as a 15-month-old kid, so I went into hospital and nearly died when I was 15 months old. Then I joined the army as a young guy. I spent 15 years in the army. I went to war in Africa, in Somalia, and had some traumatic experiences there. Then when I came back, I got out of the army and I went flying a rescue helicopter as a pilot, and I spent 5 years responding to like road accidents and all sorts of things, and so I got exposed to a lot of trauma there. So I had compounding experiences which made it particularly hard to treat. I had a breakdown in 2003, went into hospital at the Veterans Hospital in Melbourne, and went through the conventional treatment system, which really didn't fix me. It got me to the point where I could go back to work on a kind of a part-time basis, but I still had both PTSD and depression.
And what was the conventional treatment?
The conventional treatment involved, at that time, antidepressant drugs and one-on-one therapy, which I started out like 2 sessions a week. And also I went through a 3-month group therapy program where I was with 5 other war veterans, and we would come together as a group with different lecturers and therapists and talk about our traumas and, get taught about how PTSD affects the body and what things that we could do to get around it and that kind of thing. But after all that, I still had it. So, it did, it allowed me to become functional to some extent again, but it didn't cure me.
And what kind of symptoms did you have? Like, what does PTSD feel like?
There's a whole range of symptoms. Usually it's accompanied by depression. So depression and PTSD are sort of regarded as 2 different diagnoses, but usually if you've got PTSD, you've also got depression. So I had major depression or major depressive disorder, which meant that I got to the point where I was having suicidal thoughts, where I was so unhappy with the way that life was, I felt like the only way to fix it was to take the exit. And really that was the thing that triggered me to seek formal help. But in terms of the post-traumatic stress, it can play out in a whole bunch of different ways. It can result in anxiety attacks. So depending on what your trauma was, if something happens that reminds you of that trauma, like in my case, there were war traumas that could get triggered by smells or loud bangs, that might sound like a rifle going off. Disturbed sleep, so you just can't sleep properly. You lose interest in all of the things that you normally do, so if you normally exercise, you stop exercising. If you normally play music, you stop playing music. Inability to concentrate, and I got to the point where I would sit down at my desk at my computer and try and do some work, and I would sit down and just think, what am I doing here? I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing. How do I do this? And I just became eventually quite dysfunctional.
Wow.
And when I was eventually admitted to hospital, I really was at the point where I wasn't able to care for myself properly. So I couldn't do my own basic housework or feed myself, or I can remember being in hospital just after I arrived in there and trying to eat a bowl of soup, and my hand was shaking so much that the soup was hardly staying on the spoon, yeah. So it can disrupt your life in massive ways. Massive disruption.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so then how did you find out about the MDMA psychotherapy, or how did you get involved with that?
So I went through the conventional treatment. I got myself back to work, and it was actually, the way this unfolded for me was my first sort of access to psychedelic medicine was through ayahuasca. So I had a friend who invited me to an ayahuasca ceremony, and I didn't know what ayahuasca was. And in fact, I was totally drug naive at the time. I drank a lot of alcohol in the army, but that was all. I'd never even smoked a joint.
Wow.
But I was interested. I was working at the time in the area of change. So I was actually a change consultant. Through my experiences, I'd become so fascinated with human nature and this process of change that I'd started working in that area and teaching other people about it. So I was teaching in the corporate world as an organizational development consultant, where I would talk to people about the human experience of change, how that impacts us, and how to construct change programs effectively. And a guy who was working in a similar area to me, who'd become a good friend of mine, rang me up one day and said, "I've just been invited to this ayahuasca ceremony. Do you want to come?" And So I had to Google it and, find out what it was and read about it. And then I thought, okay, this sounds interesting. And my primary interest at the time was that it could be a useful thing for helping people navigate change. I had no idea that it could have been a medicine. I didn't even know that psychedelics could be medicines back then.
Yeah, wow.
So anyway, I went and had this experience. It was amazing. It was life-changing. And I found that my depression just disappeared after this experience.
Wow.
And it didn't necessarily disappear permanently, but it was just like not there for a while.
Yeah.
And so I thought, my God, that's amazing.
It's like seeing a blue sky again after a cloudy.
Yeah, and that was the first inkling I got that these things are actually medicines. No one had ever mentioned that drugs could be medicines.
Yeah.
So it was some years after that, and after I actually got involved with PRISM and tried to start some research here in Australia, that I had an opportunity to try MDMA for the first time, and I'd been quite cautious about that because if you try and do these things through the underground, you never know what you're getting. There's no guarantee that what you're getting is actually MDMA. It could have other poisonous things mixed in with it sometimes. So I was super cautious, and I was very well informed because I had access to all of the research documentation from MAPS. MAPS are amazingly transparent and open.
They're an incredible organization.
They are.
Yeah.
And so you can go to their website and you can download their treatment protocols. You can see how much MDMA they're giving to people, what the kind of sessions are run like, how many sessions are in a treatment program, that kind of thing. So I had all that information, and I'd actually, I think I'd actually met Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, and spoken to him a few times. Had a lot of contact with him. So, and I'd also been across to one of their annual conferences, the Psychedelic Science Conference in 2013. I'd sat in a room with all of the MDMA researchers from around the world who were working for MAPS, and I'd been able to have discussions with them. So I was massively well informed. And then I had an opportunity to access some pure MDMA, and I decided to self-medicate following the MAPS protocol. I had a friend come and sit with me for safety and just to monitor me. And I took the MDMA and basically...
Was it 75 milligrams? Or is it 175? Is that
at that time, the standard dose in the MAPS dosing protocol was 125 milligrams. Yeah. And so I took it and I lay back, and by that time I'd been practicing my Kung Fu for, I think it must have been, 13, 14 years. I've been practicing Kung Fu, and I do a meditative Taoist form of Kung Fu, which is, it's also a meditative practice. It's like moving meditation, and it's based on the Chinese medicine energy meridian system.
Yeah.
So I was very aware, more aware than most people of the energy flows in my body, and could sense them changing. So once I took this MDMA, I felt all of my energy centers, my chakras light up, and I felt my heart chakra just expand amazingly like I'd never felt before. And I started to feel ecstasy.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, no wonder they call this stuff ecstasy. Because it just felt amazing. And my experience was not typical at all. So I didn't have any recall of trauma. I didn't actually think about my trauma at all during that experience. I just lay there for like 4 or 5 hours in bliss, just going, wow, this is amazing. And then it started to wind down. I obviously had a talk about my experience with my friend who was there, looking after me, and then I went to sleep, and the next morning I woke up and I felt radically different. And what was different was I'd been living for so long with this background anxiety, at a fairly high level, to the point where it had become normal for me. And when I woke up that next morning, it was gone. And that was like, my God, I couldn't remember a time where I'd felt so peaceful.
Wow.
And such an absence of anxiety. It was radically different. And that was like from one session.
Well, one thing that I was wondering about, because it's very typical in any person that I know that takes MDMA, will always have like the 2-day come down after it's over. There's you have this big high while you're on it, and then afterward you just feel like the world's ending.
Yeah.
And so I was confused about that because, this is a treatment for people who are suicidal.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how do they navigate those 2 days of come down? And for you, it sounded like it didn't exist.
It didn't. I don't remember really having the come down on that occasion, and it doesn't always happen in a therapeutic sense. Sometimes it does. But what they do is they monitor very, very carefully a person's well-being. So, they have a number of sessions before they administer the drug. Mm-hmm. And out of the 11 therapeutic sessions, usually only 2 or maybe 3 of those sessions involve MDMA. Mm-hmm. Most of them are just like a standard counselling or psychotherapeutic session, right? And they start out just so the patient can get to know the therapists, can get sort of informed as to what to expect when the drug sessions start. Then they'll do a drug session, and the person will usually stay on site where they had the session overnight, so they don't go home. So the next morning when they wake up, the therapists are there. They've got access to a doctor and medical care if they need it. They'll be questioned as to their well-being. They have like formal measurement surveys which they put people through, and just to gauge whether they're feeling okay or whether they're feeling depressed or whatever. And then, of course, if a person is, feeling down, then they can take action to resolve that somehow and deal with it and support the person through that.
Because I've always been under the impression, it's a chemical thing in your brain. Your brain gets flooded with serotonin, dopamine.
Well, it actually is, yeah. So what actually happens on a physical, biological level is that MDMA works in a couple of different ways. One of the things it does is we have these little storage sacs called vesicles where we store spare serotonin, and MDMA causes all those sacs to basically squirt all the serotonin out. So we become flooded, our system becomes flooded with serotonin, which means that our serotonin receptors all get filled up with serotonin, and also the MDMA molecule itself bonds to a transport protein. And this transport protein's normal job is to go around and pick up all the spare serotonin and put it back in the storage sacs, because it's not needed at the time. So the MDMA molecule actually bonds to those transport proteins so they can't do their job, okay? So we become flooded with serotonin. And when you do that, there's always this knock-on effect. So the sort of 3, what are regarded as the 3 primary neurochemicals, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, which is sometimes called noradrenaline. If you flood the serotonin system, that usually causes an increase in dopamine and norepinephrine, but in that order, like it'll increase dopamine to a certain extent and then increase norepinephrine to a lesser extent. And so, dopamine is the feel-good chemical. And so you'll get a kind of a mild, speedy effect from the increase in norepinephrine. You'll get a really lovely, warm and fuzzy ecstasy feeling from the dopamine, and a general well-being from the serotonin flood as well. And then it takes. So what happens is it disrupts the body's serotonin reuptake system, because normally if we've got excess serotonin, the little proteins go around, collect them all up, put them back in the storage sacs, the vesicles, and restore a normal balance. So that reuptake process gets disrupted while the MDMA molecules are in our system, and it takes roughly sort of 44 to 48 hours for the MDMA to wash out of the system sufficiently for the reuptake system to rejig itself and start operating normally again. Okay. And that's why it's often at kind of like that 2-day point where we feel like we've reached a bit of a slump, an emotional slump, because our normal system of maintaining a balance hasn't rejigged itself, and it's only once the MDMA molecules are all out of the system that it can do that.
Wow, that's interesting. Is there anything you can do to help get it back faster, or is it just a bit of an acceptance, like, my serotonin's just down for a while?
Look, there's a lot of ideas out there about what might help. I mean, I don't think there's any good science around it yet, but if you read, discussion sites on the web about people and what their experiences are, then some people like to preload before they take the MDMA by taking things that are conducive to serotonin production, like 5-HTP.
Tryptophan.
Yeah, 5-hydroxytryptophan is a precursor to serotonin production. Some people will take that as a supplement. Some people will take complex vitamins, because certain B vitamins in particular are implicated in the production of serotonin. Whether those things actually work or not, or whether we're just seeing a placebo effect, I don't think there's any really good science around that just yet. but these are the things that people do, and also taking them after the fact. So, maybe the next morning after you take the MDMA, dose up on some complex vitamin Bs. With 5-HTP, I've not used it much, but I've found that you do need to be careful when you take it, because I did try it, but I found that it disrupted my sleep pattern.
Yeah, same. I get it too, yeah.
Yeah.
And it gives me crazy dreams, mental dreams.
Yeah. Melatonin, which is associated with sleeping, is produced from serotonin. It's like a derivative.
Okay.
So if you mess with serotonin, it can mess with your melatonin levels as well.
Okay.
But yeah, as far as I know, there's no good science around this yet.
Well, and I think my general theory on this kind of major downer that happens after MDMA typically is because we go at it like it's a party drug the same way as everything else. And so if I'm out partying having MDMA, then I'm likely to be out drinking, possibly having Coke, doing whatever the fuck I'm doing to my body, and not sleeping, not getting the adequate amount of sleep that night because I'm out partying all night, and then I just feel like a piece of shit the next day. Then I eat a bunch of bad food, and that will knock on for 2 days. So naturally, you're already, as we just discussed, your neurochemistry is probably going to be a little bit wonky, and then you're just contributing to that with this.
Yeah, it's a complex mixture of different things, not just the MDMA. And my understanding is that in a therapeutic sense, if somebody is suffering markedly from depression to the point where they're having suicidal thoughts, then it can be a danger factor for giving them MDMA.
Sorry.
Yeah, so you would need to be very, very careful about doing that in the first place, and then if they did have that therapy, about monitoring their progress and supporting them through what could be a very harmful slump potentially.
Have you read much about the research in ketamine for people that are immediately suicidal?
I have read a little, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting little start to it. I mean, I've had ketamine myself as well, and it's a funny thing. Whenever you talk to anyone who's had ketamine, they usually kind of have a little smile on their face, like it's like a nice pet. It's like a nice friend. I don't know, like you're always like, oh yeah, I like ketamine. Yeah. But it's an intense experience. It's definitely not something that you fuck around with, and I imagine getting too attached to what the ketamine feels like ruins it anyway. Yeah,
all of these things are usually dose dependent, and also the experience is very much dependent on set and setting,
right.
which means the mindset that you have at the time that you're doing it, and then the setting that you do it within. So who's around you, what the physical environment is like, how comfortable you feel, how safe you feel. All of these things impact your actual experience in the altered state. So there's lots and lots of different factors. And in fact, even the astrology of the day, there's, I don't know if you've heard of Stanislav Grof. Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
So
sure.
He's a legend in the psychedelic world, of course, and he was one of the pioneers of transpersonal psychology. And back before many of these things became illegal, he put thousands of patients through therapy using LSD. And he actually wrote a book called LSD Psychotherapy. And he said that the only way that he had any hope of predicting the outcome of someone's psychedelic experience was by looking at the astrology of the day. It was the only thing he found which actually was reliable. I know. Yeah.
Isn't that mental? Because you just write it off. You go, astrology, fucking idiots.
Yeah. Exactly.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, but he looked at it, and he looked at a person's astrology for the day and the general astrology of the day, and he found that there was a definite connection between that and the experience that somebody had.
Wow, that's incredible.
Very interesting.
Wow. Oh, my God. This is such a good conversation, man. We've already been talking for an hour and 20 minutes. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to have to try and figure out how to make this an hour. One last thing that I wanted to just quickly ask you about before we go is obviously we've been talking a lot about using drugs, but in a healthy and kind of safe way. One of the other things that you've had a little bit of involvement in is harm reduction. Mm. And that is kind of figuring out how we can get these drugs, quote unquote, these substances back into the general population in a safe and healthy way, or at least reducing the harm that's caused by them when they're used recreationally.
Yeah. And I think the biggest issue we're facing at the moment is because we have prohibition in place, the process of manufacturing and distributing these substances is left to criminals, right? Who often ultimately just want to make money out of it. And so consequently, they don't care so much about the purity or what circumstances people are given or take the medications, the drugs under, and consequently we get some bad outcomes, like occasionally a death at a music festival for whatever reason. So, and then the government's activity in trying to enforce prohibition is sometimes adding to the harm because, the presence of police dogs or police at a festival, for example, might make somebody panic and take all their drugs at once. That's happened, and people have died from that. So it's a very tricky situation that we have, and it's also complicated by this idea of labeling everything as a drug. We've come up with it's funny because you go to America and the word drug doesn't have the same kind of implications over there. You have drug stores, right, which are what we call chemists here, and big signs saying buy your drugs here, which is kind of funny for an Australian. But here in Australia in particular, this label drugs has been just used across the board, and within that and within the things that are labelled as illicit on our drug schedules, we've captured some amazing useful substances which science shows can be incredible medicines, like MDMA, for example. And alongside them, we've lumped things that are often harmful, like heroin, things that may be not so useful, like cocaine. And so it's a terrible mixed bag. And I think the first thing that we need to do is actually start to clean up our discussion and not talk about drugs, but be very specific about talking to these different substances in particular and the benefits or the harms that they bring.
And use with each other. I mean, because that's the gross thing about it. When you lump everything in as a drug, then it's like, oh, I'm going to party tonight, so I'm going to drink a shitload of alcohol, and we got some tabs of acid, we're going to get some MDMA, we're going to have some ket, and then all of a sudden you're having this fucking mental cocktail of shit that should never be mixed together ever.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you don't know what the fuck's going on, and then everyone says, oh, drugs are bad, and it's like, no, the education on drugs is bad. It's terrible.
That's right. If you go to a doctor and you get a prescription for a pharmaceutical, you go to the chemist, you get it in a box. It comes with a pamphlet that you can open and read that's got all the side effects and, don't drive a car when you take this or, whatever. There's none of that.
And you know what's in it. You know the purity.
And you know it's pure, but we don't have that because of prohibition. So I think one of the first things that needs to happen on a sort of government level is we need to reschedule these drugs according to the science, because our drug schedules are not related to science at the moment.
Right.
The science,
cannabis, for example, is a fucking joke.
Yeah, exactly. It's an amazing medicine. Yet it's right there. We're scheduled with everything else. So we need to change that. We need to have a science-based system for classifying these things as harmful or not. In the meantime, we need to do whatever we can to reduce the harm under this system, which really it doesn't work. Things like pill testing, for example, at music festivals, I think is a great start. And also having places where people can go at the festivals to be looked after if they're having a hard time. And our organisation Prism works closely with DanceWise in Victoria.
Oh, cool.
To do that. So DanceWise are run by Harm Reduction Victoria, which is actually a government-funded agency, which is amazing.
Awesome.
And they go to music festivals. They set up a tent, the DanceWise tent, where if somebody's tripping hard and having a difficult time, they can come, their friends can bring them to the DanceWise tent. There are people there who know, what drugs do, who understand whether medical treatment is needed or not. They're usually parking the DanceWise tent next to the medical tent anyway. So if somebody needs medical attention, it's only right next door. Right. And it's a place where people can go sit, be reassured by somebody who knows what's going on, that things are okay, and you're just going to have to wait a few hours until this wears off and you'll be fine, And often the times it's as simple as that. Sometimes, I've worked as a volunteer and along with the other Prism guys with DanceWise on a couple of occasions, and sometimes you'll get somebody coming in who really is in need of medical care, like they're having a massive anxiety attack. It doesn't matter what you say to them, they're not going to calm down. Sometimes they'll be scratching the skin off their fingers or whatever, and you have to actually go to a doctor and say, look, we need to sedate this person, or
give them a tranquilizer.
Something has to happen, yeah.
Wow.
But
and on a personal level for a person taking drugs, so there are some recommendations, like say with MDMA, for example, because there has been some research on how to reduce the harm of MDMA while you're taking it, because most of the MDMA-related deaths are due to dehydration or heat exhaustion.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't make any recommendations simply because of the system that we have in place here, where drug use is illegal, and if I make a recommendation, then I could be seen to be supporting the illicit use of drugs, and because of my connection to PRISM and the hope to get some legal research up and running, we can't connect those dots. Unfortunately, we have to play by the rules. However, if somebody was in a country where MDMA was legal, and they wanted to care for themselves, while they were using it, then that would be a different story. Somewhere like, say, Portugal, where it's decriminalised. I think you summed up a lot of the stuff before when you said that people go out and they mix it with alcohol. They don't keep track of how much they're taking. They do arduous activities where they're dehydrating themselves. They won't sleep properly, and then they wonder why they've got a bad come down.
Yeah.
So it's simply, it is really about self-care. It's about responsible use. So educating yourself about, what is an average dose, taking notice of the effects that these things have on you. And, maybe if you take 2 pills and you wake up the next day and you don't feel good, then maybe don't take 2 pills next time,
Yeah.
Simple things. Remaining hydrated, not mixing them with alcohol or anything that could be detrimental, because sometimes, you take 2 different things and there are contraindications. So the effect of one will actually change the effect of the other one in a harmful way. Education is a big part of it too.
It's a massive one. Yeah. And that's the sad thing, like you just touched on a great point there. It's so sad that people that know the most about this shit can't talk about it because it's fucking illegal.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be seen to promoting drug use. Because I agree, I don't think that we should be promoting drug use. But people are going to take drugs. Whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. And what we really want is for people to do it as safe as possible and as healthy as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully, somewhere down the track, hopefully we'll get a science-based drug scheduling system.
Yeah.
So the law changes, and those things that have been scientifically proven to be beneficial medicines, less harmful than alcohol and tobacco, for example, they won't be illicit anymore. They'll be available, and you'll be able to buy them knowing that they're pure. You'll be able to consult people who can give you the exact information about what to do and what not to do when you take it, and we can have open education out there and those sorts of things. So I really believe the world is heading in this direction. There are a lot of countries that are pioneering this kind of thing. Australia is backward when it comes to this process and progress at the moment. We're lagging behind all the countries that we like to compare ourselves to, like the UK and Canada and the US, for example. It really, as far as I can figure, it comes down to conservative attitudes, particularly within our institutions, like our educational institutions and our medical profession. People are afraid to take a risk. They're worried about the impact on themselves or their institution of being seen to be doing something that's socially unacceptable. And of course, the fact that it's generally regarded as socially unacceptable by older generations is a big factor there. But as we get the generational change happening, people who've grown up going to music festivals and popping pingers and know that, they didn't die, they're eventually going to become politicians and doctors, and this is happening already. We're getting PhD students coming through now who've grown up this way, and they know that these things are actually useful if they're used in the right way.
Right.
So it will change.
That just kind of sparked an idea in my head. We could end on this, but in the same way we've been talking about fractals and little things that expand into bigger things, you're talking about a person that's isolated and lives in like a small country town, and they aren't exposed to change a lot. Australia is very isolated.
That's right.
Geographically compared to everywhere else. So maybe maybe that's why we struggle.
Yeah, that's quite possibly part of it. And plus, we have agriculture is a big thing here. It's one of our major industries, and that I alluded to that agricultural mindset where things don't change radically so much. You can do the same thing over and over and over again, and generally it works, except when the climate changes.
Oh, man. Well, thank you so much. What a great conversation.
Pleasure.
Where can people find you if they want more information?
So the PRISM website is prism.org.au. That's our research organisation. My personal website is emanate.net, spelled EMAN, the figure 8.net.
Cool. Awesome, man. I'll have links to all that on my website and everywhere. And Excellent.
And also I do a radio show Monday mornings on Bay FM in Byron Bay, which is streamed on bayfm.org. It's called Future Sense, where I'm talking about the evolution of human consciousness and the future, basically.
You've been listening to Future Sense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. Future Sense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.